Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Welcome to this new session with l'Observatoire Audiovisuel Européen. It's the third year that we are organizing this session. I want to thank you, Gilles, to prepare this wonderful session each year. And Suzanne, of course. We have a partnership with the Observatory since 25 years now, more than 25 years, I don't know anymore. With more than 25 years to create the focus report that you can find here at the Marché du Film, with all the figures about the release of the films in Europe and all over the world. It's a strong partnership, and 3 years ago we wanted to add this introduction session to underline some trends, some major trends that you observe, and thank you once again, Gilles, for that. Suzanne, thank you for your trust, and have a good session.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Guillaume, and thank you also the whole team behind him, and thank you all for your interest to come again. For us, it's a great moment that we can mark the release of the focus with this event. I mean, the observatory, we are there in order to give information. And when it comes to film, I would say the focus is the Ferrari for the information on film. And actually, this Ferrari is permanently maintained and done well and even becoming speedier thanks to this team here to my left, which will also, of course, guide you through this event by highlighting some of the most interesting findings and raising some policy issues that we will then in turn discuss with the special guests. And that is, of course, someone that we selected from the country of honor, Switzerland, this year. And I might just want to introduce already now briefly who's sitting here. So let's start with our guest from the country of honor. That is Matthias Bürcher. He is the head of service distribution and diversity from the Swiss Federal Office of Culture. And next to him is Martin Kanzler. He is the deputy head of information on market. And next to him is Manuel Fioroni, who is relatively new with the observatory, but has already done a tremendous parcours, testified by the focus, and then supervising all of this is Gilles Fontaine, and the three of them, you will see, will take turns. But before that, I'm very happy to also have somebody else from the country of honor, namely the co-head film at the Swiss Federal Office of Culture, Laurence Dayat, a well-known face whom I hope you also all know. Please come and greet our guests and enjoy. And remember, we do not have chocolate, but we have information. That's the observatory.
Yeah, the chocolate is at the Swiss pavilion in case. There are, I think, over 13,000 chocolate bowls you can get over there, right next to the Canadian pavilion, in case. So, hi everyone, I'm really happy as a member of the Federal Office of Culture to welcome you and to thank the Marché du Film for being here. It's a great honor to present ourselves in the various programs and especially today at the Focus. As you might know, Switzerland is a very small country, but it's essentially focusing on co-production, so it's really important that we have figures on co-productions. We're collecting them. We are also sharing them with our neighboring partners, the French-speaking countries, German-speaking countries, and Mexico and Canada. That is our environment, and as well as Italy. So we have a small amount of co-production agreements, but we are part of the European conventions, of both conventions, so we can co-produce with probably every European country. Maybe for the context, so thanks to the European Audiovisual Observatory also to organize this focus event, because your work and your statistical analysis not only help policymakers, but also the whole audiovisual sector. A couple years ago, we were really helped by you directly and indirectly in gathering the figures for implementing our investment obligation that was put in force on 1st of January 2024. It was admitted by public vote in 2022, so we had a public referendum voting on the Swiss film law, which was adopted by 58% of the population, which was probably the highest market share we ever had for the Swiss film industry and the consumers. And I welcome a former member of the Federal Office Director, Isabelle Chasso. She was in the lead for the whole process, so she's probably checking if the implementation process is going well, I guess. So welcome to you as well. And I will pass you on also to my colleague Matthias, as he was presented already. He's really our expert for figures. If you need anything on anything on figures in Switzerland, just call him up, send him a mail. He will provide everything from gender to diversity to co-production intensity. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just trying to get the slides to work. In the next 45 minutes or so, we will be discussing trends in the European film sector. In order to do so, we will use some key, very basic headline figures, namely those that you can find in the Focus publication. In the Focus publication, however, you will find those indicators for all worldwide major markets. In this event, we will focus on Europe, and with the help of our valued guest Matthias, we will put a special light on the situation in Switzerland. So let's start with arguably the two most important indicators for the film industry, that is admissions and box office. A couple of years ago, some people saw the end of cinema as we know it. Clearly, this has not happened. Cinema has grown back in 23 in Europe, and that is wider Europe, not only the EU, so including in particular Turkey and other member states of the Council of Europe. It grew by 18% to about 860 million, which is about 77% of the pre-pandemic average when you take 2017 to 2019, which, I may remind, were particularly good years for the theatrical market. So if you look at the longer term, that recovery rate is actually a bit higher, it's closer to 80%. And Switzerland actually performed slightly above the average, growing 20%, and particularly the recovery rate with 83% is well above the pan-European average. Comparable to, we've compared Switzerland with markets of comparable size to give it a bit more context. Austria, similar in terms of recovery rate, but both of them ahead of countries like Norway or Denmark. The one country really falling behind in 23, that was Turkey, which used to be the seventh largest market in Europe, but had a really difficult year, I guess also due to the difficult economic situation, where the recovery rate is only 46%, but that's an exception. Generally, it ranges around between 85 and 75, I'd say. Ticket prices increased, but they increased generally below the inflation rate, which means that gross box office results grew faster than admissions, 22%, clocking in at 6.7 billion euros in wider Europe, compared to the 7.6 that we had before the pre-pandemic, meaning it's about 10% higher, the recovery rate, close to 90% of the pre-pandemic level. And again, Switzerland here is in the average, similar to the comparable countries. One country that had a comparatively poor performance last year was also the UK. which is why it's here at the end, but also linked to the exchange rate developments as this is measured in euros. One question that we are asking ourselves is that just another step towards growing back to where it was, or is 23 already a kind of new normal level? There are a couple of arguments or observations that could be made for this new normal level. One is the observation that the recovery rates in mature markets in Europe seem to be converging. When we look at Denmark and Czechia, which already had about 80% recovery rate in 22, you see that in 23 they basically stagnated. Other markets like Germany, France, who had an average growth rate, they continued to grow, but at a slightly lower rate than other markets. And markets which had a comparatively low recovery rate in 22, like Spain and Italy, they really jumped, particularly Italy, jumped in 23. So that at the end, the recovery rates are really converging between this 80% plus minus 5 to 10%. You can also see that markets which had a recovery rate of 75% already in 22 grew on average only 2% in 23, whereas markets with a lower recovery rate grew by 21%. And as a result, the bandwidth of recovery rates is converging correspondingly. In 21, you had a range of 40% from 20 to 60%. In 23, that was 50 to 80%. And now it's about 70 to 90%. So each year so far, the bandwidth, the range has been closing down. Another indicator is, that's a weak one though, but 24 may turn out to be a particularly challenging year for theatrical markets. On the one hand, we have collected Q1 figures for 15 European markets. 5 registered an increase, but you see that 3 out of those 5 are markets with a below average recovery rate, which would be consistent with what I said before. And 2/3 of the markets for which we have data actually declined on a year-by-year comparison. 24 might be particularly challenging as we will feel the impact of the US strike actions from last year. The Olympics are coming up, the European Football Championships are coming up, so that's classical reasons why this year would be exceptional. But there might also be more structural reasons like consumer behavior, which has changed, as has been proven by a lot of research. Some elements of this might still persist for a couple of years or longer. And there's also seems to be a lower appetite for franchise films, which we will comment on later. And that would be particularly important because it is franchise films that really do drive the European box office. Among the top 30 films each year, the majority are franchise films. And if they perform well, then the box office performs well. If they don't perform that well, then box office is down. And then, of course, you have increasing political instability and extreme weather conditions, which will increasingly affect all of our lives. But if your town is being flooded, you will not go to the cinemas. So there are some arguments that why the growth trend that we've seen in the past 1 or 2 years will slow down or not continue next year, or this year, and we'll see in 25. At this stage, I would like to ask my first question to Matthias to share with us some of the observations that you made with regard to box office development in Switzerland. Perhaps also go a bit beneath the level of aggregate figures. And do you think that in Switzerland box office and admissions will grow back to what they were before or even exceed?
Well, thank you. First, I would tell that actually the cinema owners are very happy with the result of the last year. It's a kind of a sign that cinema is not dead, actually. We have difficulties, but actually people are going back to movies. And they are, of course, also happy that we are above average on the European level. But there are some buts. One but is actually that this depends essentially on two films. I'm talking about Barbie and Oppenheimer, which make about half of the difference. And I wonder why there is no case study here in Cannes about this marketing, because it really achieved a level of public attendance that people who never go to cinemas went to the cinemas. And I think this kind of marketing should be copied. But if you take these two films out of it, we would have better figures than 22, but not much better things. Then I think probably, yes, we see that there is kind of consolidation. And if you look at the long term, from 2010 to 2019, we had the problem that the cinema attendance was decreasing. So actually, if you project from 2019 to 2023 and cut out the pandemic, normally we should arrive finally at -10, or maybe, I hope not, -15%. This is one thing, and the other thing, we are also talking about average. When we see for the multiplex cinemas, the result was much more better. They are -10, they're quite normal. And little cinemas with only one screen, actually they are at -20%, so they are living on their economies actually, and cutting costs. But we also see that this was very interesting because we have a policy on taking art house and curating films and programming, but actually the cinemas which performed best compared to 2019 are cinemas in middle-sized towns who are showing both mainstream and art house films, but they do not specially make events or premieres, because premieres we only have in Zurich and Geneva, but they have an economic advantage that they are the only thing that happens in town. So actually, the main problem for growth in cinema is actually what people could do else, and not necessarily the streamers. Actually, the cinemas don't think in Switzerland the streamers are the problem, but every other activity which people could do. And now, where are you going to go? I think the cinemas have decided a kind of price strategy. So we are a mature market where actually they increase the price to have the same box office at the end. And they could go in a better strategy if they understand that probably the different audiences have different needs. So actually for the younger audience, they can't go on with the multiplexes, but they will have the problem with the price at a certain moment because they won't pay. And for the art house public, there is a problem if the cinema as a place where you want to go, where you don't want to have people with popcorns disturbing the film, and where you want to stay afterwards. And I think cinemas, when they want to grow afterwards, they have to for this kind of public, they have to look what is around the public, the cinema, before and after, and also what is in the street. Are there bars, or there restaurants where people can go to?
You mentioned that multiplexes performed particularly well, or above average, and that the cinemas in mid-sized towns performed also well. That's a good segue to the next indicator, which concerns the theatrical infrastructure. The most basic indicator here is the number of screens. Clearly, the collapse of box office posed a big challenge, particularly to exhibitors, and one would not have been surprised if a certain number of exhibitors would not make it through that period of time. But at least measured in this as aggregate screens, this is not the case at all. The European screen base is stable. The screens are there, and they have always been there. I guess largely thanks to public support also throughout these crisis years. Of course, you have significant differences among countries in Europe with regard, for instance, to screen density, where Switzerland is also above the average with 7 screens per 100,000 inhabitants. So you have very mature markets with a high screen density, and you still have a couple of particularly smaller in the Balkans and the Eastern European markets where you have a comparatively low screen density, where actually building new cinemas can still be a relevant growth driver for overall box office. And you also have differences in the structure of cinemas. We used as a proxy here screens per site as a proxy. For the higher that indicator is, the more multiplexes you have, the more larger cinemas you have. And as you can see, Switzerland here is below the average, meaning has an over-proportionally large number of comparatively small cinemas. So my question to you, Matthias, would be, could you briefly tell us about the characterization of the Swiss theatrical market in terms of maturity, cinema types, and beneath this level of aggregate screens, do you see a structural change?
This number, actually 2.4, was much surprise for me, because the tendency in Switzerland is the same as in Europe. You have more screens but less cinemas, so you have more multiplexes. But I see actually we are at a very low level, because we still have an infrastructure of cinemas in very small villages. I've had our Minister of Culture. She lives in a village with 1,500 people, and they have a cinema there with a normal programming, actually. So, but they have different economics. We have the cinemas in the countryside. They work mainly on voluntary work. The people are not really paid. Then we have in the mid-sized towns there, we have cinemas which are often owned by smaller companies, family companies, but they own their cinema. And then we have the cinemas in the bigger towns. They have the problem because they have to pay your rent, and they are in competition with fashion stores and restaurants which have a bigger return on investment. And what I have seen was the screen do not show the number of screenings. And what we have, compared to pandemic, we have 14% less screenings than before on the same number of screens. We don't know what exactly this means. It probably means they don't show a film on Monday, or only one show on Monday, or sometimes they close in the summer and show only films in the weekend. And this is, for us, is a short-term strategy, but you can cut costs on license, you can cut costs on personal and energy, but not on rent. So actually the problem will stay, and we have the problem, especially in high-price towns like Zurich and Geneva, that cinemas in town, where they really have a cultural role, they can't pay the cost anymore to maintain the cinema. So actually the economic model is in danger, at least for art house films.
I now switch to first releases and the number of first releases in Europe. And we can see that after a few difficult years, the numbers of films available in cinemas is actually stable and back to pre-pandemic levels, with more than 2,400 films available across Europe. Now, since we calculate this number with our own Lumiere database, we have decided to only include films that achieved more than 1,000 admissions in 2023 to screen out films that were shown for the first time in cinema, but maybe they only had one screening. If we consider all films that were available in Europe last year, the number of new releases would be higher than 4,000, which would represent a new high, all-time high. But regardless of the methodology to calculate this tricky number of new releases, the main finding here is that in Europe there is not a lack of films in cinemas, but the gap between films available and the admissions that open in 2020, if we look at it index graph, is still very much open. So films are back at full force in cinemas, but our admissions are taking a longer time to go back, if even they will ever go back. So this gap is still open. In Switzerland, the situation is slightly different. The number of releases is still below pre-pandemic averages, minus 14%, which matches more or less the decrease of admissions. So in other words, there are less films, but also less tickets sold. And interestingly, if we look at, if we break down these numbers, we can see that in Europe, the number of releases is actually led by European films, which are back to pre-pandemic levels, if not even higher, in 2022. While American films, which historically are the most successful in cinemas, as we know, are still 14% down compared to the 2017-2019 averages. And similarly, in this case, in Switzerland, European films and Swiss films are recovering better than American films, with local production being released at the same rate, if not even higher, also in this case, than pre-pandemic times. So Matthias, my question regarding new releases for you would be that seeing that the number of first releases is back to pre-pandemic highs in wider Europe, with European leading the recovery, why in Switzerland this hasn't happened and the number of film releases is still below pre-pandemic times? Do you believe Swiss theaters are reaching saturation when it comes to film offering?
Well, probably first, the reduction of screenings, 14%, means already that there are less slots. So actually it's more difficult to release a film if you have less shows than you can organize. But I think we have also saturation of number of releases actually, which just the media don't cover anymore. All releases are a problem that people don't know when the film actually is showing. So probably it's quite a correction that there are less releases. What we have seen actually, there is a different pattern between US and European films, which is we could be a strategy of the US majors, because in 19 there were median was about 60,000 entries per movie. Now we have less movies US, but the median of entries is still 60,000. So actually, they don't put more films on the market than they think the market can consume. And actually, we have the European films at the same level, but actually we go from 12,000, already in a completely different level, 60,000 and 12,000, and we go from 12,000 to 9,000, and actually Swiss films is about the same range. So actually,
we're getting there.
At a certain moment, I think the distributors react to that, and they see that they cannot release all the films because they don't get the publicity for it, for the European films.
Yes. Thank you. And so we have seen the number of releases, and out of all these releases, these are the top 20 films that European audiences watched the most in theaters. So in 2023, there were only 4 films that managed to cross the 30 million tickets sold threshold, sorry. And I'm talking about Barbie, unsurprisingly, that sold almost 50 million tickets, Super Mario, Oppenheimer, and Avatar. And by the way, this is the first time since 2019 that 4 films managed to sell more than 30 million tickets. But after that, there is quite a drop from the 4th place onward. And again, as it was the case last year, no film managed to sell between 20 to 30 million tickets. You see that Guardian of the Galaxy Volume 3 is actually half the number of admission of the previous title, which is Avatar. And by the way, Avatar was released during the Christmas break, so in 2022, but it still managed to sell more than 30 million tickets in 2023 alone. But the overall aggregate admission were around 65 millions, which is one of the highest successes of all time, if I'm not wrong. But looking at this graph, and although you can only see part of the picture in this table, it is quite clear that the concentration in Europe is still very high, and with the top 10 alone accounting for more than 30% of overall admissions for the 3rd year in a row. And just to have a benchmark, in pre-pandemic time, this share was 25%, so 5% less than now. And unsurprisingly, the top 20 in Europe includes exclusively American titles, which is in line with previous years. So there's not a single title coming from Europe or the rest of the world in the top 20. And to find the first European film, we have to go to rank 25, where we would see the French production Astérix and Obélix, L'Empire du Milieu, which was the most successful European title last year. Switzerland, like the majority of European countries, has a very, very similar top 20 chart with American titles at the top of the year-end list and the 4 top titles crossing well above the rest of the list with more than 500,000 tickets sold. And they're exactly the same for films. In this case, though, 2 European titles managed to sneak in the charts, and I'm talking again about Astérix and Obélix L'Empire du Milieu at place, I cannot see, but 13. And at rank 20, we have Die drei Fragezeichen, which is a family-friendly crime from Germany. Even in this case, though, we have no local production in the chart, and to find it, we have to go to place 23, where there is the most successful Swiss title of the year, which is Bonjour Ticino, with a little over 100,000 admissions. Now, although the hegemony of American films in Europe hasn't changed over time, and we're not expecting it to change anytime soon, the types of film that reach the top of the charts seem to be somehow different to what we were used to in the past. And if we break down the top 30 titles by categories, part of a franchise or not part of a franchise, and by franchise we refer to films that are part of a bundle of films based on the same IPs. So I'm talking about cinematic universes, prequels, sequels, spin-offs, and so on. Well, we can see that last year, the average admissions of franchise films have dropped by more than 45%, while all other films saw an increase of 56% on average. And last year was the first time since 2001, the year when the first Harry Potter films came out, that there was no franchise films in the top 3. And of course, last year's successes like Barbie and Super Mario the movie are based on very popular, very popular IPs, but we can still consider them original films. They're not connected to any other previous installment of a franchise. And if we also consider quieter successes that were not present in this chart, but they were nevertheless record-breaking success, like the concert film of Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, or even local surprise hit like the Italian film C'è ancora domani, which was a bigger success than Barbie in the country, we can hypothesize that audiences' preferences seems to be shifting away from established franchises and action-packed superhero film towards more original, diverse, and in a way fresher films. And in the end, this diversity is awarded in theaters, or so it seems. Now, of course, it's too soon to see if this is a trend. We only had 1 year when this happened, but it's interesting to keep an eye on it and see if this is actually a tendency, or from 2024 we go back to the Marvel flicks. But yeah, so far it seems like we're changing direction. So we have seen how film releases are back to pre-pandemic times, pre-pandemic levels, sorry, while admissions are still down by 23%. And if we do the math, this reflects in a decrease in average admissions per film of more than 20% compared to pre-pandemic averages. But interestingly, if we break this number down, we can see that this important decrease doesn't really affect American films any longer, at least, because they are on average grossing as much as they were before the pandemic. We are around 2.2 million for each release. On the other hand, though, European films are grossing on average almost 30% less than pre-pandemic times, with little growth between 2022 and 2023, as Matthias was also mentioning just before. So then if we switch to market shares, it comes as no surprise that the market share of American films has increased for the 3rd year in a row, reaching 70% for the first time. So this is an all-time high number. And European films achieve a market share of 26%, which is slightly lower compared to pre-pandemic shares. In Switzerland, the situation is quite similar. American film hold the lion's share of the market, unsurprisingly, with 68%, while European films, which in this graph do not include local production, account for 23% share, and they're quite stable in the past 3 years, while Swiss local production slightly increased compared to 2022, up to 6.3%, which is nevertheless still lower than pre-pandemic averages. And now, Matthias, I come back to you, because 2023 marks the 3rd year in a row for Swiss production not to appear in the year-end top 20 chart. Despite releases, we have seen they're back to pre-pandemic levels, if not even higher. So I'm going to tease you a little bit, baby. Are local audiences moving away from Swiss films?
Well, our strategy is to achieve top 5 every 4 years, but I had a first figure I think is interesting. We were talking about too much European films. But when you look at the end, actually, we have a quite good market share when you take Switzerland and European together compared to the average. So actually, flooding the market with European films is not good for the individual film, but for the entire market share, actually it does work. Now, for Switzerland, we have this problem. We're always telling, actually, we are a small country, 9 million inhabitants. We have 3 languages, which all are open markets. We have in Germany, France, and Italy, all are at least 20 times larger than the Swiss market. So actually, this film, and it's not a surprise that these 2 franchising films, Asterix and Die Drei, are coming to Switzerland, but actually they have the same public. So we have a little niche strategy, which is the Swiss-German. So we can make Swiss-German film, which public accepts more than the others. So we have kind of comedies, but normally they are between the 50 and 100,000 range, so that they don't achieve this. And the other problem is that normally all experts says that comedies are not translatable, so they do not work in the other languages. So this is the first answer, but this is all wrong, because this year we have Bonjour Ticino, which is a comedy written in 3 languages, something not to do, which works, now we are 350,000 entries, which makes top 5, and it works in all languages. So actually we can say, like Nemo said, Bonjour Ticino broke the code.
All right, then we're going to see it at the top of the chart next year, hopefully, which is great representation for Ticino. Another question would be regarding the average admissions, because we've seen that the average admissions of American films are back to pre-pandemic levels, while European films saw their revenues decrease by close to 30% on average, and I believe Swiss figures, as you were mentioning, are quite similar. Do you think the comparatively large number of European and Swiss films available in cinemas are somehow cannibalizing each other for a market share that just will not grow?
Well, saying the market share, actually not. But I think there's still a problem with producing European films, because they are more and more targeted to festivals, and festivals are more and more looking for films which don't work on theaters. So actually, the producers are like split to what market they wanted to produce, actually. So I think in the long term there will be a problem, because the public the publicity for the film is not possible for a growing market with more and more films. I think there are now 3,000 European films per year that are produced, or something like this. Which
I'm getting there. It's the next chapter.
Sorry.
No spoilers. But then, yes, we can talk about production, which is my last chapter. And similarly to new releases, the number of films produced have reached and overtook pre-pandemic highs in Europe. In 2023, the number of production across Europe is estimated to have reached more than 2,300 films, which is the 2nd highest figure after 2019, and signaling that the production sector in Europe is alive and well and quite busy. And both documentary and fiction productions are seeing an increase through the years, with fiction production reaching an all-time high record number of 1,460 fiction feature films produced last year. This is the highest number since we are collecting this data. And similarly, the Swiss sector seems to be quite busy as well, with feature production increasing by more than 50%, compared to pre-pandemic levels, up to 109 titles produced in 2023, which is a growth rate higher than the pan-European figure. And if we break down the large number of Swiss production, interestingly, we find out that documentaries usually account for 2/3 or even more than the total number of films, making Switzerland the 4th country in Europe in terms of documentary production, and it was even 3rd in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So my question regarding production would be, what is the importance of documentaries for the Swiss film industry?
But there is, I think, historical reason, and there is economic reason, and there is a cultural reason. I think the historical reason was actually that Switzerland had too little money to produce fiction films, so actually the directors could faster produce documentaries, was 6 times cheaper than a fiction film, and we had really, actually in the theaters, we have a public for this. So actually this is long term, since the 60s, actually the Swiss-German part was always documentary, and in the 90s the French-speaking part also started to make the documentaries which work very well on cinemas. And then probably we also have a cultural element that Switzerland is a happy country. We don't have a lot of problems, which is difficult to write dramas. So actually, no, we produce artists like Marcus Retz, Jean Tinguely, Pipino Tiriste, which some kind look like the bright side of the world, actually. So we are good in this and less good in drama, probably.
I agree. Well, my last question for you would be that we see here that the number of production in Switzerland increased by 15% compared to pre-pandemic average, although admissions levels have seen of Swiss films in theaters, both locally but also internationally, if we look at export, appear to be stalled, if not even shrinking. So my question would be, what is the fate of this increasing number of Swiss films production when it comes to distribution and exhibition?
Well, first I want to relativize, because the fiction number is more or less stable. Actually, it's a documentary which has doubled, so actually this increase. The reasons are that we have a more active co-production policy. We are supporting actively minority co-production. This comes back to us, so we can actually make better films now. We are co-produced. The reason is also that we have the new investment obligation, which actually we will have commercial actors invest in it. And we are also starting to produce animated films. We had Ma Vie de Courgette some years ago. We have Sauvage this year. It's of course a big co-production, because the talent is not in Switzerland. There are very few people who can make this work, but it's organized from Switzerland. The problem, can the market consume it? That may be a problem. It will be a challenge. We also, in the policy, we will challenge how much film we support for producing and how much we support for distributing. Actually, there is kind of, the balance is not met anymore. We will have to discussions with the filmmakers about this. But the problem is we want to keep the diversity of the films. We don't only want the big films or only the small films. So actually, we find a kind of way to make less of all, but better.
And they also perform very well in festivals, that's for sure. Well, that was it from my side. I now give the floor to my colleague Gilles Fontan, which will talk about film policies in Switzerland.
Yes, to conclude that session, I would like to discuss the film law that was mentioned by Laurent in his introduction. One of the aspects is to implement the new obligations, investment for streamers, but also for broadcasters. But I understand it was also the opportunity to review, redefine the relationship between audiovisual services and producers. And I would like you to guide us to what was the approach, redefining this understanding of what is a producer and an independent producer.
First of all, for the people who are not from Switzerland, actually what we have, starting from this year, is that television and on-demand services have to invest 4% of their general gross revenue into Swiss production. So actually we were much severe than, because in Europe normally it must be European films, but we ask it for national films. So it's very high value. It's a small figure, but it's very high valued because they have to invest here. We had a lot of discussion what kind of films we would like to achieve. We had we looked all your mapping reports about what is an independent producer, and we saw that there is a problem because we want to make things possible, but we want not to have problems with the film funding. So actually, we have defined a kind of 2 levels of independence. Because we have the independent producer, which must be a separate entity, must not be owned by the service, must not have the same management, must not have more than 50% of income from the service, and must have also some experience. We don't want somebody to install a company and invest directly, which would be kind of circumventing the rule. For this is the basic condition. Then we define the second level, which is the independent work. Independent work is when this independent producer has the initiative, has the contract with the author, controls the production, and keeps rights which can effectively be used, so actually that doesn't sell out. And what we do now, actually, we accept investments for both independent works and commissioned films, but put the commissioned films in a separate box, and these films, they don't have access to any public funds, even not cash rebate in Switzerland. So actually, if they do this, actually they can do this, but they have to pay all, or they have to find another commercial investor. And if they invest in co-productions or license more, there are more licenses because service don't want to be co-owner of the film, then actually the license is only for their own use. They cannot resell it, and it's limited to 5 or 7 years, depends co-production, and they can make some options, but actually it's limited, it comes back. I think I have a lot read of the mappings because actually there was a confusion about producer and work, and I think we could have resolved it. But
just a clarification question on the independent producer level. Is it independent from any TV channel or streamers, or for the TV channel and streamer commissioning the work? This depends. For the I think it's concerning ownership. Is it against any investment service? Concerning commissioned work, it's actually only against the commissioner. So actually, you can have commissioned work with one, with 3 services at the same level. Actually, we would stay independent. Okay, thanks. You just mentioned tax rebates, and I have the feeling that your approach of considering it as public money, as direct public support, is quite specific. So in many countries there is really two different approaches. Condition for public support and much more relaxed condition for tax incentive. You seem to have been more cautious about tax incentive than in many countries. Why?
But first there are legal reasons. Actually, the tax rebate is part of the film law, so actually it's cultural money. So that every film must be an independent film which must meet these conditions. And actually we see also, it was not really our decision, it was the politicians' decisions, but actually we've seen an advantage for it because this rise of economic cash rebates actually has also some adverse effects, which don't really help the national industry to develop work afterwards. They become kind of dependent, and there's also rise competition on talent, which is not really helpful for the national industry.
So it means that there is no tax incentive for pure servicing company available?
At this time, no.
Why at this time? No. It's
actually, I am speaking for the Minister of Culture. If the Minister of Economics has another approach, they are free to do it.
Okay. Maybe one last question. When we prepared this discussion, you mentioned something like the tax incentive tourism. My question is, there is sometimes a gray zone between co-production and going for tax incentives. You see sometimes co-production with very small amount invested in co-production to get a lot of money in tax incentives. How do you set up the limit between a real co-production and basically a co-production which only aims at triggering some tax incentive money?
Well, in the everyday business, actually, we are more severe than the agreements. Actually, we always ask for effective artistic participation on every film. So there are some kind of red lines we do not cross. But we see the problem in general because everybody is going up with the percentages now. The 20 now looks like more 40% is the new normal, and we see this bad because actually people are traveling to get this, and with the Germans and the Austrians now we're starting to discuss that because it's kind of insane when you talk about sustainable production. Because we are also on the bad side actually, because we had some films which are playing completely in Germany, and then there is 1 week in a forest in Switzerland, because you don't see that this Swiss forest, but the 1 week they meet actually the condition. So actually we are discussing on the co-production agreements to some kind of exchange of these rules, so that we still have the investment on the entire things, but we can avoid that.
This time it's my last question. It would be interesting if you could elaborate on what you said before, that there are some drawbacks to incentives for the national film industry. You just mentioned that there were some negative aspects. What did you have in mind?
Well, I meant an artificial increase in prices, in wages, which is good for the technicians, but actually we've even seen between television and cinema, we had some films that were completely financed by our office, by the regional funds, and they had to wait for the director, because the director had to make a series first. So actually, then it means that when this money is much bigger than we're not at this stage now, because our economy financing is about 70 million cinema and 50 million audiovisual. But if the audiovisual is much bigger, actually, then actually what you decide in the cinema as a fund actually is not really impacting the cinema anymore, because people are running after money. For reasons.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Matthias. I think we are at the end of our event. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again for participating. If you didn't get already your copy of the Focus, there may be some left at the entry of the room. Thanks a lot. Have a nice evening.